Hello, my name is Casey. I came home one afternoon without warning and found my little sister locked in the basement, taped, shaking, and silent. My stepfather stood over her like nothing was wrong, like it was just another day. He told us both we'd be out of the house soon, but what he didn't know was that I had once hidden something in that house too. A voice, a file, a secret I wasn't supposed to remember. What kind of man installs cameras to watch a child sleep? What kind of family turns away while it happens? I didn't mean to start a war, but once I opened that closet, how could I not finish it? As I clutched it, my fingers remembered before my mind did. This was the thing I'd once hidden in fear. The cool plastic, slightly cracked at one edge, still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. It was the old voice recorder I'd bought years ago, back when my gut first whispered something wasn't right in this house. I never told anyone about it, not even Mom. I didn't want to cause trouble back then. I didn't want to believe the man she married could make me feel unsafe in my own childhood home. But now, as I held that recorder in my hand with Darvin standing at the top of the stairs, and Narina still curled behind me, I wished I had said something sooner. The house was quiet in that unsettling way. No hum of conversation, no distant TV, just the ticking of the wall clock in the hallway and the lingering echo of Darvin's threat. His boots creaked against the floorboards. He didn't rush. He never did. He always wanted you to hear him coming. I slipped the recorder into my back pocket, turned, and crouched beside Narina. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks flushed with tears and humiliation. Her whole body shook like she hadn't felt warmth or safety in days. "Hey," I whispered, brushing a curl off her cheek. "It's me. You're safe now, all right?" Her lips moved, barely. No sound. Her eyes darted toward the stairwell. She couldn't even look at me, not fully. It wasn't just fear. It was shame. She thought this was somehow her fault. "Casey," Darvin's voice bled down the stairs like a toxin. "You better rethink whatever you think you're doing. She's had an episode. You don't want to get pulled into this mess." I stood up, slow and steady. "This mess?" I said, my voice surprisingly even. "You mean the one you chained in the basement?" "That girl's unstable," he snapped. "I've done everything I can. Don't come in here playing savior." There it was, the narrative he'd always relied on, the savior complex. He painted himself as the man who took us in, who raised someone else's daughters, while pretending his help came without terms. And when we stopped being silent, we became ungrateful, disloyal. Narina grabbed my wrist. "Don't argue," she whispered, hoarse. "He'll just twist it." She was right. That was his gift. He didn't raise his hand. He raised doubt. He made people question what they knew. He turned concern into confusion and silence into guilt. And somehow, always, he looked like the wounded party. I helped Narina to her feet. Her legs wobbled, but she stood. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and started walking toward the back of the house. The kitchen was dim, only streaks of late sunlight slipping in through the blinds. Darvin hadn't moved. He stayed at the top of the stairs, watching. "Where do you think you're going?" he called. "Out," I said simply. "And unless you'd like the sheriff involved, I suggest you stay right there." He laughed. "I've spoken to the sheriff 3 times this month. Trust me, he knows who the problem is." Of course he had. That's how men like Darvin operated. Quiet, behind closed doors, legal in just enough of a way that when you screamed, it sounded hysterical. We stepped outside, the screen door snapping shut behind us. Narina flinched. The evening was cooler than I remembered. The autumn air had a bite, and I'd forgotten to grab coats. I led her to my car, parked in the gravel driveway, leaves brushing against the tires. As we got in, she pulled her knees up and held them tight. "I tried to call you," she said, barely above a whisper. "I know, baby," I said, starting the engine. "I know." But I didn't. Not until I found the recorder. Not until I saw her eyes. We drove in silence for a while. I didn't know where we were going yet. I just knew we had to get out of that house. I reached for my phone and hit play on the voice recorder, hoping it still worked. Static. Then a faint click, and his voice. "Don't talk back to me in front of your daughters, Isolde." My mother's voice, smaller than I remembered, replied, "I'm not. Don't make me show them what happens when people forget who runs this house." I pulled the car over. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from fury. Narina looked at me, wide-eyed. "Was that?" "Yes," I nodded. "It was him, years ago. I recorded it when I was your age." "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was scared. Because I told myself it wasn't that bad. Because I thought no one would believe me." Because Mom smiled in public and cried in the bathroom. But I didn't say any of that. I just reached over and took her hand. Because I didn't know what I know now. We drove to a motel on the edge of town, one of those places with dusty curtains and old carpeting, but the woman at the front desk didn't ask questions. She handed us the key, smiled at Narina, and offered us hot cocoa packets. It felt like a tiny kindness in a world that had become hostile. In the room, I helped Narina into the bed. She curled up immediately, her fingers locked around the edge of the pillow like it was the only solid thing in her life. I didn't sleep. I sat in the chair by the window, the recorder on the nightstand, the voice of my mother echoing in my mind. "He's done everything he can. She's unstable. I've spoken to the sheriff 3 times. No, not this time. This time, I was listening." My thumb hovered over the call button. Then I looked at Narina and pressed record instead. I didn't know yet what I was going to say or who I would send it to, but I needed to start leaving breadcrumbs. If anything happened to us, I wanted a trail that didn't start with Darvin's version of the truth. Narina was curled under the motel blanket, her eyes half closed but still watching me. She hadn't asked where we were going earlier, and I didn't offer much. She just followed. She always had. I sat down on the edge of the bed and glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was barely past 7, but the sky outside had turned a muddy blue, and the air inside felt heavy, like every molecule knew it had to carry weight that didn't belong to it. I pulled the voice recorder from my pocket. It still had a faint scratch where I remembered dropping it once in the kitchen during a holiday dinner long ago. I clicked it on. A soft beep confirmed it was alive. That beep felt louder than Darvin's entire speech earlier. I turned it in my hands, remembering the day I bought it. I was maybe 22, still in college. I'd come home for Thanksgiving. Back then, Darvin hadn't been this bold, but something in his tone had always rubbed me wrong. Something too measured, too polite, like someone trying too hard to sound normal. That night, after dinner, I recorded a conversation where he threatened Mom over a bank withdrawal. She played it off, said he was just stressed. But even then, I knew better. I never told anyone. I didn't want to be the daughter who always stirred the pot. Now I knew. I should have stirred harder. Narina stirred under the blanket. "My head hurts." "Did he give you anything today?" I asked. She blinked, unsure if she should answer. "It's just me now, okay?" I said gently. "No one's watching. You don't have to protect him anymore." She nodded slowly, then said, "He makes me take these little white pills, sometimes crushed in orange juice. Other times he says it's vitamins, but I know it's not. I feel floaty after. Like I'm not inside myself." I exhaled through my nose, trying not to let the heat in my chest rise into my throat. "Where are they now?" "In my sock drawer, at home." "Do you remember what the bottle says?" She hesitated. "It's not my name on it." That stopped me cold. "You mean it's prescribed to someone else?" She nodded again, barely moving. I pulled my laptop from my duffel and began searching medication identifiers based on her description. My fingers flew across the keyboard while Narina stayed still, watching me like she wasn't sure if this was a dream or a rescue. The pill she described was a high-dose antipsychotic, usually prescribed for severe cases, not something a child should be taking, not without a full diagnosis, not without consent. He'd been drugging her to keep her quiet, to make her doubt her own memories, to give himself ammunition if she ever told anyone. I stood up too fast, knocking the corner of the chair. I paced a few steps, then stopped. My hands were shaking again. This time, not from fear, but rage. The kind that came when every instinct you ignored suddenly screams, "You should have known." I sat back down, opened a new note on my phone, and started typing a timeline. Dates, names, incidents. Anything I could remember. Anything Narina could offer. Casey, she whispered. They won't believe me. I paused, looked at her. Why not? Because I scream sometimes, at school, or I cry for no reason. And he tells them I'm not stable. He told my teacher I make things up. And you know what? I said, brushing her knuckles with mine. People scream when they're not safe. That's not crazy. That's survival. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. I typed for another hour, gathering every scrap of memory I could. The motel room was quiet aside from the tapping of keys and the low buzz of the old fridge humming in the corner. Then my phone vibrated. A text. From Darvin. You make a move, I make you regret it. Both of you. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the screen. He always chose his words carefully. No outright threat. Just enough to make you question if it was a warning or a promise. I showed Narina. She bit her lip and looked away. I turned the recorder back on. This is Casey Blake. It's 8:14 p.m. I'm with my sister, Narina, in a safe location. This message is a record of events and actions taken by Darvin Blake against my family. If anything happens to us, this is the beginning of our story, not the end. I clicked save and uploaded it to a secure drive. Then I emailed it to myself and 2 old law school friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years but trusted more than anyone in Greenville. I want pancakes, Narina whispered, almost like a child. It caught me off guard. What? Tomorrow. Can we get pancakes? I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my chest. Yeah. We'll find a diner. It was the smallest request, but maybe the biggest sign of hope I'd heard all day. I set up an extra pillow on the floor beside her bed, plugged my phone into the outlet, and dimmed the light. She fell asleep within minutes. I stayed up, watching the shadows on the ceiling shift with each passing headlight outside the window. I didn't know exactly what came next, but for the first time in years, I knew what I had to do. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, and titled it, For Court. It was the only name that felt honest, not evidence or backup. This wasn't for me. This was for whoever needed to hear the truth when the time came. The motel's Wi-Fi flickered weakly as the device booted up. Narina was asleep again, but lightly. Every so often, she'd flinch at sounds outside, car doors, muffled laughter from another room, a siren far off in town. I stayed near her, half on the bed, half in my head, sorting through years of doubt like puzzle pieces that never fit until now. I plugged her cracked tablet into my charger. It took a few seconds for the screen to light up, and when it did, I braced myself. The lock screen was blank. No password. It felt too easy, like walking through a door I wasn't supposed to know existed. But when I tapped the messages icon, my heart hit my ribs. There were dozens, maybe more, of unfinished texts, drafts, sentences that trailed off like she got scared midway through typing. I scrolled. Can you come this weekend? He says I'm crazy again. I didn't drink it, but he got mad. I want to go home with you. None of them had been delivered, each message time-stamped but marked unsent. It wasn't that she forgot. She tried. She reached for me. For anyone. Then I noticed something near the bottom of the settings menu, a sync icon. It led to a remote device listed as Parent Safety Mirror, a program I'd seen advertised once, marketed as a way for guardians to monitor minors' digital activity. Except this wasn't parenting. It was surveillance. Darvin had synced her device. He'd read these messages, deleted them, controlled what went in and out. I exhaled sharply, clenching my jaw until it hurt. This wasn't just manipulation. This was silencing. I opened a note app and started copying screenshots, creating a time-stamped log. I added them to the For Court folder, organizing by date. Each image was a scream no one heard. Then something caught my eye, a file in the school email folder. It was labeled Behavior Review. It had been forwarded multiple times between teachers, a counselor, and Darvin. There was an attachment, a video. I clicked play. My stomach twisted. The footage showed Narina in a classroom. Her voice was loud, breaking, begging, "Stop saying I'm lying!" She knocked over a chair, flailed her arms, trying to push past someone. The camera angle shook, taken from a phone, not school security. Kids laughed nervously in the background. Someone muttered, "She's losing it again." The message above it read, "This is why residential treatment might be necessary." He used this to paint her unstable, to push the narrative that she was broken. I paused the video on her face, red, tear-streaked, wild-eyed, not wild from illness, wild from desperation. Behind me, I heard sheets rustle. Narina sat up, eyes barely open. "I wasn't mad that day," she murmured. "I just wanted them to stop saying I was lying." I closed the laptop slowly and turned to face her. "I know. You weren't the problem. They were. He is." Her shoulders tensed, like she didn't believe me yet. "You're not crazy," I said softly. "And we're not letting them win." She watched me for a long moment before lying back down, this time facing me, not the wall. I stayed up, reviewing every corner of the tablet, then switched to my own laptop. I uploaded the screenshots, video, and files to 3 different cloud platforms, using aliases and encrypted labels. I saved hard copies to 2 flash drives and hid one in my boot, the other in the lining of my bag. The next hour passed in a blur, my fingers moving faster than my thoughts. I was stitching together a quilt of truth, thread by thread. If he'd built a story, I was building a counter-narrative brick by brick. Around midnight, the motel room settled into a rare kind of quiet. Narina was breathing steadily. Her face was finally peaceful, like sleep had stopped fighting her. I stood to stretch and walked over to the window. The parking lot below was mostly empty. A single light flickered above the vending machines near the front office. I checked my phone. No new messages, no missed calls. Darvin hadn't followed up. That made me nervous. He was never the kind to explode in the moment. He was the type to wait, to calculate. That's what made him so dangerous. I returned to my bed, sat cross-legged, and took a deep breath. Somewhere in all this, beyond the fear and guilt, there was something else stirring in me. Fire. For too long, I'd tried to avoid drama, tried not to be the difficult daughter, the troublemaker. But silence hadn't kept us safe, it had only kept him hidden. I opened a new email and typed the subject line, "Confidential material, backup copy." I attached the files. Then I addressed it to 2 people from my law school cohort, both working in child advocacy now. We hadn't spoken since graduation, but I knew who they were then, and I had to believe they were still that person now. I hovered over the send button. My hand didn't shake. I clicked. The screen confirmed. Sent. And just like that, I felt something shift, not in the world, not in Darvin, but in me. No more hiding. I poured coffee, knowing that today, I wasn't just her daughter, I was her voice. The mug felt heavier than usual in my hand, not because of its weight, but because of what I knew I had to do next. The sun had barely begun to bleed through the motel curtains, but I was already dressed, packed, and restless. Narina stirred under the covers. Her breathing was steady, her face more peaceful than it had been in days. I didn't want to wake her just yet. There were things I needed to face alone. After I rinsed my mug in the small bathroom sink and made sure she was still asleep, I slipped out quietly. The walk back to the house was longer than I remembered, not because of the distance, but because of the dread settling deep in my bones. The key still worked. I stepped into the kitchen, the silence loud in my ears. Everything looked the same, down to the mug Darvin always used, sitting unwashed in the sink. The light was different, though, sharper, as if even the sun had grown tired of this place's secrets. I made my way up to the attic. The steps creaked with every shift of my weight, a familiar protest from wood that had held too much silence over the years. The attic hadn't changed either, just more dust, more cobwebs in corners where light dared not reach. I started digging through old boxes. Most were just papers, receipts, holiday decorations. Then, tucked behind a chest, I saw it. A small, locked jewelry box, one I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. I lifted it, felt the weight of something important inside, and brought it down to the main floor. It took me a few tries, but I managed to pop the lock open using a dull kitchen knife and an old butter spreader from the drawer. Inside were three things. A photo of the three of us, Mom, Narina, and me, taken during a day at the lake when life still pretended to be kind. A folded piece of paper, yellowing at the edges. It read, "Don't let him tell you what I meant." And a small black USB drive. My stomach twisted. I didn't plug it in there, not in this house. I drove back to the motel, hands gripping the wheel like the steering column might slip through my fingers. When I got back, Narina was awake, sitting upright, clutching a throw blanket to her chest. She looked at me, eyes wide. "Where did you go?" I held up the box. "What's that?" "Something Mom left," I said softly. "Something she didn't want him to find." We plugged the USB into my laptop together. There was one file. Audio, no name, no title, just a date, 8 months before Mom died. I hit play. At first it was just static. Then her voice broke through. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't say it to your face." Narina's hand found mine, fingers gripping tightly. I don't know when it started. I just remember realizing I was always holding my breath. That's not love. That's control. And I was too proud, or too ashamed, to admit I married the wrong man. I couldn't blink. I stayed because I thought it was safer that way. But if something happens to me, if I'm gone, don't let him rewrite the story. The voice trembled, but there was steel underneath it. He'll tell you I was unstable, that I couldn't handle things. But you know me. You know better. A pause. And, Narina, baby, if he ever turns on you, I'm sorry. I should have run sooner, but I didn't know how. The recording ended with a shaky breath, hers or mine, I couldn't tell. I closed the laptop. The silence in the room thickened, like the air had been replaced with grief. Narina pressed her forehead against my shoulder. She knew. She knew, I whispered, and she'd tried to protect us the only way she could, quietly, just like I had been doing, just like I couldn't anymore. That afternoon, I logged into the old banking app Mom used. She had set up a college fund for Narina years ago. It wasn't much, but she contributed to it every month. The account was empty. The transaction history showed a large withdrawal 6 months after Mom's death. It had been rerouted to an LLC under Darvin's name. Not even hidden well, just buried in the confidence that no one would look. Legal theft. That's what they called it. But I knew better. It was desecration. Narina sat beside me, watching my face as I pieced it all together. "Was it for his business?" she asked. "Some shell company," I muttered. "He called it estate consolidation. He robbed your future, Narina, like he robbed Mom's peace." We printed the statements, highlighted key transactions, and added them to the folder. I recorded myself again, narrating what I found. By nightfall, we had a binder full of paper and a drive full of files. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like prep for battle. Narina asked me that evening, while brushing her hair in the mirror, "Do you think she knew you'd come back?" I paused, caught in the mirror's reflection. "I think," I said slowly, "she left the breadcrumbs, knowing I'd follow them." We didn't sleep much that night, but we slept close. She finally stopped waking up in a panic. I finally stopped flinching at every creak in the hallway. And in the morning, when I poured coffee again, I realized something had changed. I wasn't waiting to be rescued anymore. I was becoming the one who rescues. That night, the silence in the house wasn't peace. It was the space before war. The kind of stillness where you know the storm is coming, and it's not a question of if, but when. I woke early, even before the alarm I hadn't set. The motel air was stale, but something about it still felt cleaner than the house we had escaped. Narina was still asleep, curled on her side, arms wrapped tight around her pillow like it might float away if she let go. I left her a note on the nightstand, a quick scribble. "Back soon. Don't open the door for anyone but me." I didn't drive back right away. I parked down the block from the house, walked the rest of the way. The wind was sharper that morning, carrying with it the scent of damp leaves and something heavier, unspoken things buried in old floorboards. As I approached, I saw Mrs. Kincaid from 2 doors down standing on her porch with a mug of coffee. She raised it slightly when she saw me, her expression unreadable, then gestured toward a manila envelope sitting beside her flower pots. "I've been meaning to give this to you," she said without preamble. "Didn't want to send it through the mail." "What is it?" "You'll see." I opened the flap and pulled out a USB. She added, "Security camera for my back porch. From last spring." I didn't ask how she knew what I needed. Some things don't require explanation. Back at the house, I waited until I was inside, door locked behind me, curtains drawn, before plugging it into my laptop. The footage was dated 2 weeks before Mom died. The camera caught a sliver of the upstairs balcony, just enough to see shapes. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Darvin and Mom were arguing, his voice low, hers higher, frantic. He reached for her arm. There was a stumble, a blur, and then the feed cut out. No smoking gun. But it reframed everything. No accident, just another fall that no one bothered to question because the man at the center knew how to speak calmly when it counted. I sat there for a full minute, fists clenched in my lap, breathing like I'd just run 5 blocks. Then I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked down the hallway to the guest room I had been using. Something wasn't right. The smoke detector on the ceiling had a small blinking light I hadn't noticed before, not the usual red, blue. I pulled a chair over, stood up, and unscrewed the cover. Inside, tucked behind the usual wiring, was a pin-sized lens. A camera, not motion-activated. Live feed. My stomach turned. He had been watching me. Every night I'd changed clothes. Every time I whispered to Narina. Every file I typed on this laptop in the false safety of this room. He saw it all. I ripped the device out and threw it against the wall. It cracked on impact, pieces scattering like brittle truths. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked to the kitchen instead. Darvin came in from the backyard just as I poured myself a glass of water. He saw the broken plastic on the floor first, then looked up at me. "You think breaking things helps your case?" he said, voice casual, almost amused. "No," I replied calmly, "but this will." I slid the envelope from Mrs. Kincaid onto the counter. "Security footage from a neighbor, you and Mom, balcony, 2 weeks before she fell." His jaw tightened, just slightly. "You've got nothing," he said, the amusement in his tone thinning. "I've got enough." He leaned against the doorframe. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? I've lived here for 20 years, paid taxes, donated to the firehouse, sat on the HOA board." I smiled. "And yet somehow, all it takes is one video to burn it all down. You're bluffing. Try me." There was a beat of silence, a tension you could pluck like a guitar string. He straightened, composed again. "You're always good at playing the victim." I stepped closer, keeping my tone even. "And you're always good at dressing up abuse in a suit and smile." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "If you ever record me or Narina again, if you so much as look at us sideways, I'll take everything you've built and turn it into ash. Don't test how far I'm willing to go." He stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind his eyes. Not fear, not yet, but the beginning of it. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, past the hallway, and up the stairs. Halfway up, I stopped. "That was your warning," I said without turning around. "There won't be another." Some men fear guns. Others fear exposure. Darvin. He feared neither, because for years he thought no one would dare touch him. I left the house around 10 that morning, after Narina finished her oatmeal and went back to sketching in her notebook. She didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't offer a full answer. I just kissed the top of her head and told her I'd be back before lunch. The police station was just off Main Street, tucked between a dry cleaner and a barber shop that hadn't changed its window display since the Clinton administration. The inside smelled like old paperwork and overused coffee filters. I stepped up to the front desk with a folder clutched in my arms. Printouts, USB drives, screenshots, annotated statements, copies of banking records, and one labeled audio file. A young officer with kind eyes and a pressed uniform greeted me. "Morning. How can I help?" I kept my tone measured. "I need to report ongoing abuse and financial misconduct connected to a death that was classified as accidental." He blinked. "All right. Do you have something documented?" "I do." I slid the folder across the counter. "My mother's name was Isolde Blake. My stepfather is Darvin Blake. She died last year under suspicious circumstances. This contains evidence that he has continued abusing her youngest daughter, my sister, who is a minor currently in his care." His eyes skimmed the top of the stack. For a brief second, he looked concerned. Then his gaze landed on the name. I saw the shift. "Darvin Blake?" His tone tightened. "Yes." He cleared his throat. "Let me get someone from the investigations unit." He walked into the back office. A few minutes later, a different officer, older, thicker-necked, with a sheriff badge pinned above his breast pocket, stepped out. "Miss Casey Blake?" "Yes." He picked up the folder, flipped through a few pages like he was skimming for entertainment, then placed it down. "I appreciate your concern," he said slowly, "but from a legal standpoint, there's no indication of immediate danger." He had a hidden camera in the guest room. He accessed my sister's device remotely. He stole funds from a college savings account set up in her name. I understand, but unless there's current physical harm or proof of direct threats, we can't intervene on a custody matter without a court order. "You don't need to intervene," I snapped. "You need to investigate." "We've worked with Mr. Blake before," he said, almost like it was supposed to mean something. "He's a respected member of the community. Respected people abuse children too." "Miss Blake," he sighed, "if you feel strongly about this, I'd advise you seek civil recourse. Maybe contact CPS. But without hard evidence of a criminal act that falls under our jurisdiction, our hands are tied." My voice dropped. "You don't want to touch him." He didn't answer, which was all the answer I needed. I gathered my folder and left. In the car, I stared straight ahead, 10 seconds, then 20. The heat building in my chest had nowhere to go. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked. Then I slammed my palms against it. Once, twice. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was breaking from frustration. Everything Mom had tried to say in whispers. Now I was screaming, and it still wasn't enough. I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Trenton, our old family lawyer, the one who had handled Mom's estate. "Trenton Law," came the voice. "Hi, this is Casey Blake. I need to speak to Mr. Trenton regarding a possible misuse of estate funds and guardianship issues involving my late mother's husband." There was a pause. Then, "Hold, please." A click, a few minutes of hold music. Then the familiar voice of the man who had once helped us fill out paperwork for Mom's will. "Casey," he said warmly. "It's been a while." "It has. I need your help. It's about Darvin." Silence. "I believe he embezzled money from the account meant for Narina's education, and I have reason to believe he's engaged in psychological abuse and digital surveillance." Another pause. Then, "Casey, I can't represent you." "What?" "There's a potential conflict of interest. I've worked with Darvin on a few local cases. We've shared clients." I clenched my jaw. "Did he pay you off?" A longer silence. "I wish you the best," he said. "Truly." The call ended. By the time I pulled into a gas station lot 2 blocks away, I could barely see straight. And I parked behind the building and let my forehead fall against the steering wheel. Everything that was supposed to help, law enforcement, legal counsel, crumbled like sand. They weren't blind, they were complicit. I sat there for almost half an hour, the engine off, the world passing by outside my windshield. I saw kids riding bikes, a woman walking her dog, a delivery driver unloading boxes. The town moved on, blissfully unaware. And me? I was sitting with a folder full of screams and no one willing to hear them. But I wasn't leaving. I drove back to the house, slower this time. When I walked inside, Narina was at the dining table with a coloring book open. She looked up and smiled slightly, then went back to her drawing. I sat beside her, pulled my chair in close. "We're going to stop asking for help," I said quietly. She paused, her crayon hovering. "It's time we help ourselves." I went to the hallway closet, pulled out a large binder I had started a few nights ago. I set it on the table. "War journal," I said, tapping the cover. Narina blinked. "Are we at war?" "We are," I nodded. "But we're going to fight smarter than they ever expected." That evening, after dinner, plain spaghetti and frozen garlic bread, I sat in my room with the door locked. I opened my laptop, created a new encrypted email, and wrote a message with only a subject line. "Need background check. Urgent. Darvin Blake." I attached what I had, then sent it to a private investigator I'd worked with briefly in college, someone out of state, away from Darvin's reach. As I hit send, a quiet settled over the house again. But this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt intentional. Sometimes the truth outlives even the best efforts to bury it. That's what I told myself as I sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen. I had just come from the porch, where I'd stepped outside to clear my head. The air was cool, the kind that carries the weight of too many unsaid things. The same air my mother once stood in, alone, before she fell, or was pushed. I reached for the external hard drive I'd found buried deep in an old duffel bag shoved in the back of my childhood closet. It was covered in dust, the label half peeled off, but when I plugged it in, the computer recognized it instantly. A window popped open. Backup initialized. Last updated 18 months ago. My breath caught. It wasn't just family photos and tax files. It was everything I'd lost. Everything Darvin thought he had erased from the cloud. Every document, every audio clip, every scanned note. Even the folder labeled "just in case," where Mom had saved transcripts of emails, bank statements, and her own typed notes, some dated weeks before her death. I spent the next 3 hours cataloging everything, organizing it in a new, hidden partition on my drive. I didn't speak. I didn't move except to scroll. The house was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of settling floorboards. By early afternoon, I had a digital archive that would have made any prosecutor proud. I backed it up again. 2 flash drives, one slipped into my sock, the other taped inside the spine of a hollowed-out book on the living room shelf. When I came back upstairs, Narina was on the bed, arms folded across her chest. "He knows," she said quietly, not looking up from her drawing. "Knows what?" "That we're building something." I sat beside her, looked at the paper. It was a sketch of our old front porch, Mom standing in the doorway, Narina on the steps, and me sitting off to the side. It wasn't perfect, but the emotion in it hit me harder than any photo could have. "He's not going to stop," she said. "I know." Just then, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. "Hello?" A woman's voice. Rough, familiar. "Casey? This is Lenora. I was your mom's friend." I stood up, motioned for Narina to stay in the room, and stepped into the hallway. "I need to see you," Lenora said. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago." I met her at a small cafe on the edge of town later that day. It was one of those places with mismatched chairs and paper menus, the kind locals went to not for the food, but for the safety of habit. Lenora looked older than I remembered. Thinner. Like time had worn her down unevenly. She didn't order anything, just folded her hands on the table and stared at me for a long time before she spoke. "Your mother wanted to leave him." "I know," I said. "No, Casey, she planned it. She had documents, a storage unit, even a plane ticket, Phoenix. She was going to take Narina and disappear." I blinked. "Then why didn't she?" "He found out," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And he threatened her." "Threatened how?" "He said he had a copy of her medical file from when she was younger, some postpartum notes from after your birth, and he dug up an old financial mistake she made when you were little. Nothing serious, just she fudged a few documents to get childcare support when she was between jobs." I sat back. "He told her he'd take Narina away, said she'd be painted as unstable, a fraud. He said no judge would trust a woman with a history like hers. I pressed my lips together. So she stayed. She chose to keep quiet. Because losing you two, that scared her more than anything. Lenora looked away then, her eyes shining but dry. I should have said something sooner. I didn't want him coming after me too. I nodded. I couldn't blame her. Darvin had built his life on fear, quiet threats, pressure no one could see until they were already suffocating. Back at the house, I didn't tell Narina right away. I needed time to sit with what I'd learned. I needed to feel the weight of it without crumbling. That night, after Narina fell asleep, I sat in the living room and opened the drive again. I played one of Mom's voice memos, this one buried in a folder labeled June. If anything ever happens, I just want you to know, I tried. God knows, I tried. I closed my eyes. She protected us while destroying herself. And he'd been winning for too long. Not anymore. Sometimes justice starts with one voice and becomes a chorus. The morning of the hearing, the sky over Greenville hung low and gray. A steady mist clung to the streets, fogging car windows and muting every sound. It felt like the town itself was holding its breath. Narina held my hand as we walked up the courthouse steps, her small fingers curled tight against mine. She wore her favorite navy coat and clutched the old photo of Mom inside her sleeve. I had the hard drive, the printed statements, the handwritten journal entries, the flash drive containing Mom's last voice memos, all packed into a worn leather bag slung across my shoulder. Everything we had was inside it, and everything that man had done was about to be dragged into the light. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. Reporters were there, not many, but enough to make Darvin stiffen as we walked in. He sat at the defense table with a polished attorney in a charcoal suit. I could tell they'd spent the morning rehearsing how calm he needed to appear, chin high, hands folded, a picture of collected composure. But I knew that face. I knew the tension behind that jaw, the way his eyes scanned for exits, threats, weakness. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then we began. I didn't lead with fire. I led with facts. I stated my name, my mother's name, my sister's age. I presented the documents, one by one, bank statements, messages Narina had tried to send but never could, camera footage from the neighbor, and the medical records showing prescriptions written under someone else's name. I explained the surveillance, the threats, the gaslighting, the trauma that didn't leave bruises but settled deep in the marrow. The judge listened quietly, nodding occasionally. Darvin's lawyer objected once. Speculative. Overruled. Then the judge asked if we had any witnesses. I do, I said. The back doors opened, and in walked Ms. Merritt. She looked older than I remembered, grayer, smaller, but she walked straight, holding a worn notebook like it was scripture. She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore in. Then she opened her notebook and began to read. Narina came to me 3 times. Each time she said, "If I tell you, he'll make me disappear like Mommy." She said she was afraid to sleep, that there were cameras in her room, that her stepfather crushed pills into her juice and told her they were vitamins. You could hear the air shift in the room. People sat up straighter, eyes sharpened. Marit closed her notebook. I didn't report it. I thought maybe she was exaggerating. Kids do sometimes, but I was wrong, and I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. No one said a word as she stepped down. Then it was my turn again. Your Honor, I said, I have one last thing to share. The judge gave a nod. I pulled out the flash drive and handed it to the clerk, who loaded it onto the courtroom speaker system. A soft click. Static. Then Mom's voice filled the room. If you hear this, I didn't fall. I was pushed, emotionally, spiritually, and eventually, physically. You could feel every muscle in the room lock into place. I stayed for my girls, because I thought staying meant keeping them safe. But if something happens to me, don't let him turn them into liars. I need them to know they aren't crazy, they aren't dramatic, they're just the last people in the house willing to tell the truth. When the audio ended, I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Darvin stood up, tried to interrupt. This is outrageous. Sit down, the judge said, firm and low. The attorney whispered something to him. He sat. The judge leaned forward. I am ordering a full investigation into Mr. Blake's business holdings, guardianship agreements, and personal conduct regarding Ms. Narina Blake. Effective immediately, all financial control over the child's assets is frozen. Visitation is suspended. Custody will be reviewed under emergency conditions. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. As the courtroom emptied, people passed by slowly, some whispering words I couldn't hear. Some nodded, some stared, and then, just before I reached the hallway, a woman I didn't recognize tapped my arm. I worked for him too, she said quietly. You're not the only one. I stared at her for a second, then nodded. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to, because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it builds one whisper at a time. Sometimes justice starts with one voice and becomes a chorus. And sometimes, even that chorus echoes in a quiet house for days before you believe it's real. A week had passed since the hearing. It still didn't feel final, not like the movies. No slamming of gavels, no handcuffs, no breaking news alerts. Just time inching forward, measured by paperwork and waiting. Darvin hadn't been arrested, not officially. But the judge's ruling stood. His access to Narina was revoked. His finances were frozen, pending a full audit. The whispers had started immediately. At the post office, in line at the pharmacy. I saw them. The turned heads, the sudden silence when he walked into a room. That man who once stood tall at Rotary meetings, who hosted neighborhood BBQs with extra flags on the lawn, now avoided like a bad odor. Not because people were brave, but because they finally saw him without the mask. And that mattered more than I expected. Back at the courthouse for a follow-up hearing, Narina sat beside me, her hands tucked inside the sleeves of her hoodie. The same judge presided, his expression unreadable as he reviewed new documents from the investigator I'd hired. Before we left, Narina asked if she could approach the bench. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, a crumpled drawing she'd carried through all of this. It was old, the edges torn, colors faded. She unfolded it gently and placed it in front of the judge. That was on our fridge, she said quietly. He tore it down after Mom died. The judge glanced at it, a child's drawing, Narina and me, standing in front of our house, holding hands, our names scrawled above our stick figures, a tall tree next to us, and behind the window, a smiling figure with long hair. That's Mom, she said, pointing. It's the only thing I kept. He didn't say much, just nodded, thanked her, and marked something down. As we walked out, I looked down at her and said, You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, she replied. That picture wasn't just paper. It was the last time we felt like a family. Back home, things didn't magically fall into place. Healing didn't arrive with a bow. I still checked the locks 3 times each night. Still froze a little when I heard unexpected footsteps outside. Still jumped when a phone number I didn't recognize popped up on my screen. But it got easier. Narina slept through the night more often. She laughed at cartoons again. Her drawings changed. Less gray, more sky. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and found her putting a new piece of paper on the fridge. Not a drawing this time, but a sticky note. It said, We're still here. I took a photo of it, saved it in 3 places. That week, I enrolled her in a new school, small, tucked into the edge of the county line. Quiet. No rumors, just a fresh start. At her orientation, a teacher looked at her file and then looked at me. She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened, like she knew enough, like she understood we'd both carried something heavy just to get there. I joined a support group, too, for people who had lost someone to quiet abuse. That's what the counselor called it, violence without bruises, damage done behind smiles and locked doors. At the first meeting, a woman across the circle leaned in after I introduced myself. I saw you in court, she whispered. Thank you. I just nodded. I wasn't there for thanks. I was there to learn how to stop clenching my jaw when someone said guardian. A few days later, we sat on the front porch, just the 2 of us. A soft breeze pushed the last few leaves from the tree in our new yard. Narina was sketching again. This time, a playground. Kids laughing. Someone swinging too high. I opened the mailbox and found a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a short letter. Because of you, we didn't stay silent. Thank you. There was no signature, just that. But I read it 3 times before folding it up and sliding it into the pages of Mom's old journal. That evening, I stood in our kitchen, stirring a pot of soup while Narina sang off-key to a commercial jingle. I looked up at the fridge, and there it was. The drawing, the same one she gave the judge, taped back on the door with one small change. A new figure, drawn beside Mom. Arms outstretched, a simple smile. Is that me? I asked. She shook her head. It's her, watching us. I nodded and turned back to the stove. Not everything heals clean. Some scars stay. Some memories echo. But that's not failure. That's living. Some battles aren't won by shouting. They're won by surviving loud enough to be heard. Not every battle leaves a bruise. Some wounds live quietly, behind closed doors, inside quiet houses, under polite smiles. But silence doesn't heal what it hides. If this story moved you, ask yourself, how many voices like Casey's go unheard in your own community? Leave a comment below. Have you ever witnessed a truth no one believed? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe now for more real, raw family truths that demand to be told.